Well, I'm going to reprise a little bit what's happening. This is a process of designing in the presence of all the decision makers. The decision makers are elected officials, regulators, but also people who will live here, because you can very easily decide not to live here. There's lots of nice, inexpensive real estate in the Tri-Cities area, and there's a lot of real estate in very attractive cities like Seattle and Portland. Okay, so one of the things that we realize is that at the smallest level, this is a competitive situation. You can choose to live here. You can also not choose to live in the Tri-Cities. And too many young people choose not to live here. And that's come through, and there's different ways that they put it. But basically, it can be there's not enough nightlife, there's not enough to do, we have to drive everywhere. Basically, what they're after is an absence of urbanism, an absence of urban life. Urban life has nothing to do with density, or very little. Many of the cities that we love, and there are cities like Santa Fe and so forth, that are one-story cities. Okay? And then there's also urbanism that is, Manhattan's probably an average of 20 stories and going as high as 100. So urbanism has to do with a certain amount of mixed use and whether the public space is walkable. The reason this place of yours, these Tri-Cities, is not walkable, as I was able to show the other day, is that the codes that exist are dedicated to the accommodation of the car. The cars move smoothly, the cars find a parking space. The cars turn with a great ease and speed. No one said, don't create an America where you can't walk. It just ended up that way. When you actually accommodate the car, you end up disabling the pedestrian. Right now, the younger people are fighting very hard for bike lanes, or else going to places where they can inherit a walkable urbanism. This walkable urbanism is invariably prior to 1930. And the reason is that prior to 1930, in fact, prior to 1950, people either didn't have cars or only had one car. And it's expensive. And so people took care not only to have walkable places, but to have your daily needs nearby. And that's the other thing of it. You need to have your daily needs nearby, because many people don't own a car, or they're too young or too old to drive. By the way, 50% of America today can't drive. Why? Because they're too young, too old, or too poor. So here we have a nation that cares desperately for every disabled person, and we build little ramps everywhere, when actually half of America can't get there in the first place to use the ramp, which is astounding. It's a huge blindness. Well, they can't get there. We feel that it is actually a civic or a civil injustice that we are making a place that you can't live without a car. Your city, your Tri-Cities, is one of those places where you absolutely, no one can live without a car. You actually die if you don't have a car, which is astounding, because usually you can find a little corner somewhere where you can find your stuff. Here you can't do it. You don't have the elemental ability to live without a car. So there's an instinct that this has to change, which, by the way, is propelled by the 21st century. 21st century, the situation with driving around is part of the problem, because tailpipe emissions, very bad. By the way, you don't have to believe in climate change. If you want to sell real estate, the people who buy real estate believe in it, so don't even worry about it. People believe in the holiness of golf, and that sells real estate. So this is not an issue of science, it's an issue of marketing. The younger generation really finds very little charming in the suburbs. It turns out, by the way, this is the biggest generation of all. The second biggest generation are the baby boomers who are aging, and they gradually lose the ability to drive. And so one of the things they're doing, if you were to have a downtown, which you don't, I live in a place that has a downtown called Coral Gables. The old folk grab the downtown. Because my mother has just grabbed the downtown because she can walk to her daily needs. Because if you don't, then you have to go to a retirement community, which is awful. So those are called naturally occurring retirement communities. So who do we have here? We have a bunch of young people who leave, and quite a lot of old people of means who need this place. Now, the people with families in the middle, they probably want houses, because kids can't walk very far, the school is not within walking distance, So they're going to need, the 2 and the 3 car garage, etc. But the many houses you already have built, the 3 and 4 bedroom houses, would get vacated in a natural system as the old folk leave them and actually leave them available for the younger people. So the old folk move into the townhouses, the patio houses, the condominiums, and then they liberate the houses in a very natural flow for those who have kids. The excitement about this place is not just romantic, which there's a lot of romantic, I think, visioning that took place 3 days ago when we did the pattern language, which, by the way, I'll show you, but the pattern language, that day that we had, has actually been published already with your patterns, the things that you asked for, orderly and illustrated. I just received this, about an hour or 2 ago. So this is basically our marching orders. There's very little about this that can't be achieved. There may be some things like connecting to the river, because it's under private ownership, but it's not that it can't be done physically. It may not be able to be done politically. So that's all. But basically, everything that you ask for is possible. It's possible, however, and this is something that was not said, it's possible if it doesn't cost much or anything. Okay, that's one thing that was said very lightly the other day. People just placed orders. Let's have the art center, let's have this, let's have flowers, let's have a canal, all these things. And actually there were people who actually hinted that perhaps there wasn't the money to do that. But they were, I remember very well, they were just crushed by the general exuberance of the utopia that was being presented. Okay? But they came to see me later and they emailed me and said, this isn't going to work. Okay, this isn't going to work. We've already turned down funding. We're not going to subsidize anything anymore and so forth. So there's another unknown Tri-Cities that comes to me privately, but nevertheless votes, that is not going to give any freebies. So the theme that we're going to do here, the really interesting part, is not to make a place that's walkable and diverse and mixed use and urban and beautiful. I've been doing that for 40 years. And if you look at my name, you'll see them built everywhere. And they're exactly as predicted. The children are happy, the people are thin, the whole thing. Everybody knows everybody else. The teenagers hate it because they can't misbehave. They really do, because everybody's supervising them from the street. But it's really very cool. This can be done. It's not even hard. Remember, that's what we used to build in America with no professional training for hundreds of years. And in Europe, with very little professional training, people made places like this. It's not that hard. Okay? What is hard is to have the gumption, the willpower to go up against the existing regulations that prevent it. Every client of ours that has ever built a Seaside or an Alice Beach or a Kentlands or any one of these places is a kind of hero. Because the easy thing is to build suburban sprawl, and to build actually these kinds of communities requires a complete uphill fight. It's really heroic. And the fact that they're not better than they are is because they weren't allowed to be. It's not that we didn't know how to do it, we weren't permitted. But here we have a different, so in other words, we can deliver that. And I think there's a lot of will to deliver that, and because this is a PUD, a planned unit development, you have an ability in your existing code to negotiate everything. Not everybody has a PUD ordinance, but you do. So we can do this. Second good thing is that the general, I would say, decision-making over this site is in a relatively few number of hands, which are the port commissioners and so forth. It's not the world that has a say. It's very rare to find a place that actually has that few people that have a say. The third thing is that this land has already been, first of all, it's flat, so it's easy and inexpensive, but the best part is that the nature has already been ruined. It's a brownfield site. So we don't have to go around ruining nature and feeling bad about it. It's exactly where we should build, instead of going out further and ruining more nature. Also, we don't have to do any studies, because there's nothing very much living there. And that saves a lot of time and a lot of money. But there's one thing that no one noticed before. There's also a fantastic infrastructure on the site, which is the runway. A huge, very deep, very solid runway that landed aircraft, naval aircraft, that actually bumped hard. And with fuel trucks, et cetera, it's an incredibly thick, compacted piece. Good enough for vehicles and good enough for footings. The prior plan that you saw in the conventional thing is to tear it all out, right? You know, because it's old and it's not the right pattern, and then crush it, and then use it for aggregate to build more roads, the way you want them. Today we found, you know, you've heard me say that what we really want to do here is use that infrastructure that has incredible value. We got the value. We have an engineer that calculated the value. Removing it is approximately $2 million, and to replace it is $5 million. So already by doing a plan that keeps it, we're ahead $7 million, just ahead. Now that's incredibly exciting because it means that we've actually cooled down the cost of subsidy, and a lot of developers can actually act on it. And 3 of the plans you'll see today are premised on the keeping of the, in other words, it's a given. Now you say, why should it constrain you? Why should you be constrained by that? Every site is full of constraints. You know, every topography, endangered species, you know, polluted areas. You know, nobody who's a designer ever gets a wonderful site. It's always highly constrained. This is one of the least constrained sites. You know, if all you tell me is that I have to build on a bunch of straight lines, I'd say what could actually be easier? You know, so this is very easy and very much a saving. The other thing we wanted to do is we could ruin this very, very quickly by having expensive infrastructure. Infrastructure in my own lifetime has grown from relatively such small things like transformers that I never had to think about them. The first time I designed Seaside, you didn't have to think about infrastructure because it was so, you know, it's a little tube that looked it actually looked a lot like the trash can in your kitchen at the most. You could put it on the side, you painted it green, it went away. By the second town we did, they kind of looked like tables, like this. You know, half a table. And they could land in the wrong place and cause trouble if they landed in the wrong place. And you'd have to kind of lift them out. And by the third one, I swear they were like SUVs. And not only that, but they needed to be accessed by trucks, et cetera. And we just got so sick of it that we said, we're just going to need a pen. We'll just put them in a pen. We don't even think about it. Don't tell me what they are. I'm sick and tired of this stuff. Every block is going to have a pen. And that's because this incredible sort of gold plating, blowing up of infrastructure, with, by the way, by a lot of vested interests who are selling this stuff. Like, for example, why should, just look up and see your traffic lights. Why do you have to have a traffic line for every lane? You know, you're trying to look at a mountain, and there's a whole array of traffic lights in every direction. Every lane in every direction has a traffic light. Sometimes a dozen traffic lights. Now, if you go to the old cities, they have one. And they're not even on top, they're on the side, which is where you have to look anyway, because that's where the pedestrians are. If you look up, the pedestrian, you might hit a pedestrian. You go to Pasadena, perfectly viable, very classy places, and there's just one on the side, handling it. What's that vested interest saying, you got to pay me to do this? So what we have is an infrastructure in which everybody wants to make more expensive, and that comes out of your hide. Okay, it comes out of a lot of loans are necessary, the land has to be sold for more to the developer, who then passes that on to the buyer, but even worse, the small developer can't even operate because the charges are so huge. So far, you have very little charges. The only thing that makes this expensive is we blow it. We blow it by having an infrastructure. So one of the things we found out, I was looking at, I'm taken to places that are supposed to be really cool. Okay, I always say, take me to a cool place. And so I had to drive to Ellenburg to find a cool place. Bad news, but that's where I was taken. Oh, we can't find anything here, but I'll take you to Ellenburg. What we found in Ellenburg was an amazing system in the alleys of a kind of arch onto which was placed the infrastructure above ground. everything up there. Very orderly, very able to be manipulated, etc. We priced that system, we devised the system, we designed it. It costs 1/5 as much. 1/5. But then you say, well, we don't want any overhead infrastructure. I know you don't if it's in the front, but if it's in the back in the alley, which is where it is in Ellenburg, there's no problem at all. So here we discovered something just by observation about what a cool place is that said, we got to go back to those clever ways. Now, the other thing about not burying the infrastructure is that you can actually do design which is successional. You can actually begin with low, small, fewer buildings, and then later, as you're successful, you can actually build more, denser, taller buildings. So you can get going the way cities normally are done. But you can't do that. If you ever plan to do that, you have to put the whole infrastructure right there from the beginning. So you're paying for a dense, mature climax city, even though you're an inaugural condition. You're being pioneers. You're hardly building. But you're paying for an infrastructure that's 3 and 4 times as much, and by the way, costs 5 times as much. So you overbuild it because you can't retrofit it. It's all to the max. It's as if every toilet were flushed simultaneously, right from the beginning. This we can, and this is the first time it's been done since a very long time ago, we're going to do infrastructure that's successional. So if you see we have overhead infrastructure, first of all, I know it's ugly, but that's when it's in the front. The world is full of infrastructure in the back that doesn't hurt. It doesn't even hurt the trees. It's in the front that they hurt everything. So let's make that distinction. But this kind of thing is terribly exciting because it's going to allow what young people need, which is to build for themselves, to start small businesses, to become small builders, and actually to have what is essential to youth, which is cheap space. If you're going to incubate a business and the space is expensive, then it has a much less chance of succeeding. If you're going to, if you're going to build everything just perfectly and right and maximize as if you were Seattle, well, you can't afford it. That's what's happening in Seattle. Everything is maximized. You're not there yet. So for this to be successful, remember, we're competing not only with Seattle and Portland, we're competing with our own suburbs. Seattle and Portland are much cooler, and the suburbs are much cheaper. So we really have to be clever. But I think we can do it. There's a lot of luck behind this. And what I'm going to do now, I did not put this in order. Okay, the thing just got, from every table, it was dumped to Matt. Matt put it in disorder. And I said, I don't want even to be in order because I want everybody here to understand that they're seeing it real time. If this is a sleek presentation, well, it's not right. It isn't. So we worked to the last second, because we could have wasted 6 people 2 hours to do a presentation. We just took it off the tables, and here it is. So it's going to be in disorder, but everything means something. Okay, for those of you who haven't been here, this site, we own, basically the port owns the middle. This is our primary site, but there's an awful lot of stuff that's very underutilized, already out of date, and everything that you see here, with the possible exception of the mall, probably has a 15-year life, exception of the mall and the conference center. And that's just they're built because that's how you depreciate buildings, a 15-year life. So the fact that this is all here, that's the present, and they're very real. They're buildings like this. But as a long-range plan, which this is, we have to assume that this will be gone. Okay, that cities molt. Remember, you've seen pictures of San Francisco when it looked like a shanty town, right? Everybody's seen pictures of San Francisco as a shanty town. And then it became a Victorian town, and then it became a really mature town. Cities do that. So for me, and knowing the history of urbanism, this is first generation. So although we're going to design very, very accurately and precisely in the empty space, we're assuming that all of this will go. Not in my lifetime, but there's some kids here in whose lifetime it will be. And then instead of having this disparate stuff that doesn't fit, it can all pull together. And this is a huge site, huge, huge site. You have no idea until you see. First of all, it's very well located. It's in this the great junction of 3 rivers. Now, the fact that you have 3 rivers, which created 3 towns, I don't think you've taken maximum advantage of that, there's a lot of mutual competition. People actually are crushing initiatives that occur in one or another town. You know, there was a swim aquatic center that was going to be in Pasco. Pasco voted for it, nobody else did. Okay, if we have a Main Street here, well, the Main Street in south of Richland may be against it, and so forth. So I'm going to talk about radical things. I want to make a small place here that is like Berlin, which belongs to the 5 occupying forces. Okay, so while you may not, it happens to be in Germany, but there's a key area that if we're going to have the swim and we're going to have the this and going to be that, this may help or at least create the fiction that it belongs to everybody, right? So there's just an outpost here, like Berlin with 4 occupying forces. You know, colonial. You know, Richland can have its colony without actually the traffic problem, you know, that kind of thing. And that's just a proposal to see if it floats, because the incoming is that anything we do here, the better this gets, the more jealousy there will be. So, okay, what do we do in Miami, Florida? In Miami, when you think of Miami, you think of a city, right? It's 34 different municipalities, all with different councils, many with different codes, everyone with a different mayor, some with different police forces. You know, it's amazing. You can emigrate internally in Miami. You can live in Tel Aviv, you can live in Kingston, you can live in Havana, you can live in Buenos Aires, right? But we all share one thing, which is the downtown, where our magnificent civic buildings are happening and everybody's proud. It's not that Kennewick is the center of the world, but Kennewick has the airport. No one else has a site like that, so well located. So this is the center, which actually no one else has, and it's rather well located. You're lucky to have it. I know there are colleges here and this and that, but it's not in the center of anything. This is a very special place for everybody. And if we can, whatever we can do that's understood, it's very normal for regional triple and quadruple cities like this to have a center that belongs to everybody, so that it's not a zero-sum game. And this is the proposal we're making, is that this is the center. Okay? Now, by the way, I'm not letting you talk because this is my chance. The ones in the evening we present. The ones in the day everybody dialogues and talks. Okay, so let's talk about this site. This is our site here, the small one, that belongs to the Port District. This is the outer edge of essentially a super block, which should have been designed together. Okay, what you see overlaid here is the city of Portland. Okay, all the way from the university to, this is called, what's, Matt, can you help me?
The stadium, it's the high school.
From the high school, and that's the stadium, to the river, and over here, what's the name of this street?
Burnside.
Okay, Burnside Street. So the entire universe of Portland that makes Portland so famous, you know, this place that you never get bored, where there's a university and block after block, and all the civic buildings and everything fits in here. And what you're doing with it is actually so underutilizing it through bad planning that it's astonishing. You know, nothing but parking lots that are only used by one company, you know, roads that don't have any frontages, expensive stuff to do. So this is really sobering. We were shocked. I knew it would be pretty amazing, but we were shocked at what happens when you have a vision of the city, which your ancestors did, as opposed to the vision now, which is all about parking and moving cars. And I don't know Portland as well as you, but it's amazing what's there, okay? And each one of these, see that? Each one of these is a Portland block. So actually the width of this airfield at its narrowest is 4 Portland blocks across. It's absolutely astounding, this scale. This is what it takes to clear the ground, to prove that what we're doing here is better than a dead airport. Okay, and this is very 20th century. Consultants making a fortune, you know, everybody covering their rears because it's all been studied, but it's ridiculous. Okay, and then there's this, which is a lot smarter, which is actually what you really want. You know, which this is the modern way to do it. You know, which you really say this is the vision. So you get the thick one and the thin one, okay? But I wanted to say that in order to do that, in order to do this thick report, we had to, we had to design a whole town, which is what you see here. This is what was actually submitted as an alternative to a dead airport. And what it has is a wonderful plan of blocks and squares at the end, right? Squares at the end, receiving the traffic with retail, and then beautiful boulevards and squares and boulevards and a great park in the middle and a boulevard and a square. And by the way, the walking distance from here to this square is 5 minutes. That's half a mile. That's a 5-minute walk from here to there. This is a 5-minute walk from here to there. This is a 10-minute walk to the center where the bus can actually stop and pick you up. Everybody walks 10 minutes to transit. They walk 5 minutes to their daily needs. It's called a small and a large pedestrian shed. It's a circle like that. And then over here, it's very important to reach the convention center and some other things that are happening, and it's very important to reach to the edge. So what you see here is our site, and then interventions that are taking place all over and all around. And this is a perfectly good plan until we had the idea to save the pavement. And then we have to rethink it. Okay? The other thing that happened is that a lot of the stuff that's going on out here is, how shall I put it, wakes up a lot of sleeping dogs that we don't need to move this forward. Landowners have to participate. We have to talk to a lot of people. So what we're doing, we're preparing a plan. We have a special agenda that actually minimizes the interventions here. They exist. There's still a master plan, but it's kind of less ambitious. Less roads are moved. We're going across less private property and so forth. So one of the things that you'll see gradually is a plan that changes. This plan will change for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. One is that we're less interventionist on the land that the port doesn't own, and we are, in fact, going to pay a lot more attention to the use of the paving because it saves us $7 million right off the bat. So that's a plan that is going to influence what we do, but it will also change. That plan had another problem, which is that it actually envisioned, here you see it in 3D, it actually envisioned a 3-story mixed-use downtown. Now, a 3-story mixed-use downtown is what we used to do as a matter of course back in the 20th century till 2008. What happened at that time is that the bankers did not want to give small loans. When you went in and said, I need $500,000, they said, well, really, we're not interested in that, but we'll give you $15 million, because they were working off fees, right? They resold the loans, famously, but they wanted to make the bigger fee because the processing takes just as long. So nobody wanted to make a successional project out of small elements, and everything became Santana Row. Magnificent dinosaurs, which are really magnificent. If you go to Santana Row in Palo Alto, it's magnificent, but it works so long as you feed it 2 tons of fodder a day. And that stopped. So the model after 2008 is you achieve the same thing, but it's a bunch of little mammals that only need 2 acorns a day. And the mammals are little chipmunks and things, that themselves have a lot of initiative. So the whole idea is to cut this down into much smaller increments so that many people can do smaller loans. It's also much more exciting, much less fakey. All these Santana Rows, single architect doing the whole thing, and you kind of fake the variety, but it's still, you can tell it's fake. You can only do real things when different people do different things. Within limits, but yes, that's the way the reality goes. The other problem is that these 3- and 4-story buildings for 100 feet cost $15 million. That's what they cost. So you get a loan, you get a big deal, and you have 100 foot of downtown. And you say, well, how many years till I get something? 15 years. So this brings up something which is our new towns in Florida, which are really successful and were incubated out of nothing, like Seaside, began it with an inaugural condition of single story. It was single story shops, extremely nice, but single story, sometimes temporary, and then walk-ups. houses, townhouses, walk-up apartments, and not on top of each other. That's expensive, but beside each other. So what we're proposing here is an inaugural condition that you, yes, sure, you end up being Portland, but you begin by being something that's possible in our lifetime. Believe it or not, these single-story places and two-story places are beloved, and they're the ones that have all the preservation ordinances. So the big danger is that they won't grow because you love them too much. And there's nothing I can do about that except do a bad job. So that's always an option. We can do something you don't love. You know, that works, but it's not lovely. But generally speaking, the ones at Seaside, if you ever look at a plan of Seaside, and let's remember to show them a plan of Seaside, Matt. Everything built on the south side of the square, all that stuff is temporary. Except it's so well loved that it's become permanent. But it doesn't even have footings. It just sits on sleds on the sand. And it's been there for 25 or 30 years, and it's wonderful. But it incubated everybody. And when a business was incubated at very low rent, it was then decanted to the 4-story buildings that eventually made the square. What we couldn't do was get rid of the temporary buildings because they're so cool. Okay? So instead of doing this, I think you have to imagine something that mostly looks like 1870, except at the ends. At the edges, there's 3 places where you can actually build more because they're so well located. But generally the center is going to be that stuff you see in the west. You know, for example, I don't know whether you've been to Telluride, but the downtown of Telluride, much loved, is still first-generation downtown. You know, the district up at 20th Street, which is pretty cool in Portland, is 1 and 2 stories, 1870. So there's nothing wrong with 1870, except it's perhaps not dense enough for a mature condition. But that's not our problem. You know, that's somebody else's. You know, they can have a fight later, 50 years from now as to whether to knock it down. See what's next. Okay, now, a few things. This is not a very great drawing. Okay, here's my hotel. Here's where I work. Somewhere here I work. We've knocked that building down, but somewhere here. And I can never walk there because the people who care about me in the hotel won't let me. I say, I'm setting off this morning. I say, oh, they call me Andres. Oh, Andres, don't go. You won't, you're going to be run over, which is pretty interesting. I threaten every morning to go. And what you have here is great proximity. This is the central square, I should tell you, the central square of the big thing. This is the central square, but they don't let me walk. Now, here you have a conference center that I happen, yes, here it is, that I happen to like a lot. It's simple, it's nice, it's dignified, it's what a town this size should have. Okay. Next to it is a hotel, which I also kind of like. And I was just told this morning that actually the back faces the conference center opens this way and the hotel faces the other way. The front door. And you say, is anybody in charge here? Actually, I sent a crew out. I couldn't believe it. So I said, you go out and look at the construction site and tell me. And they'd come back and say, no, it's true. And I said, I still don't believe it. And then finally somebody who knows said it really, truly is backwards. There's a lot of back front thing. One of the things that you actually find as you drive around this whole area is that the backs of buildings are actually constantly facing the fronts of buildings. It's like, here's my dumpster, and that's your front door. In other words, there's no order. It's very unplanned. I'm sure the traffic flows just right, but it's very unplanned. Okay, so that's just an instance. This is the existing, I think it's called a Toyota Center, right? Here. And this is a huge parking field. So this is the hotel, that's the conference center. This is the extension of the conference center. And this is the long road that we wanted, right? That we connect to the edge. And these are two roads that exist like that. This is what we're proposing in terms of the Civic Center. We believe that this area here that we will draw for you, like that has all the civic facilities that work at a regional level, should actually be owned by all 4 cities. That this is your Berlin. That the conference center and the aquatic center and the opera and the concert hall and the opera house and the skating rink, why should one city either carry the profit or the prestige or the cost of these facilities that are perfectly, obviously belonging to everybody? So that's just a proposal we came up with, and I'm just proposing and some of you can actually think otherwise. So we grouped everything here. Okay, so I know that the conference center is going to succeed, is going to expand. And the reason it's going to expand is if you build this plan, it'll actually be a cool place to come to a conference. If you don't build this plan, what will happen is what always happens is that every booking agency always books the conference center. Every conference center or convention center is always successful at the beginning, right? Because everybody wants to try it. Oh, you want to go to the new one, it's not expensive, etc. But then the reports come back, and you know what it is? Actually, there's nothing to do. Actually, there's nothing special about the shopping. Actually, the restaurants aren't that great, and the bookings go down. That is the history of convention centers. Except the consultants won't tell you that, because, of course, they want you to build a convention center. But they will succeed if people have a good time after the convention, if spouses come and there's something to do, etc. And one of the things people like is if you just have 2 blocks of cool shops and restaurants, you actually become a destination. There are many, many cities. In fact, Denver, when Denver first became cool, I went to see it. Oh, Denver is now cool. I went to see it. They only had 2 blocks. And then, of course, it became much bigger. But there's a threshold. What we're proposing is that here, from here to here, on the site of the port, there be the 2 blocks here. So we take these 2 high-speed roads that do like that, and at the knot here, we form a square. You see, so the old avenue that comes in forms a square. And on this square is a street that picks up the hotel, the existing convention center, the future convention center, and the performing arts center facing right on it. As you will see, this building needs to be rebuilt, but you can't build it on the same footprint because you can't stop using it. So we reserved a site for it here that also faces another site for the aquatic center we put here, because it's probably not such, it's used by locals. It's not and there's a reason to put it here that will become more evident later because it actually activates one of our squares. And so this is the kind of Berlin that but this actually starts becoming, you know, the central square of the new neighborhood. The Performing Arts Center is the jewel. It's the most prestigious thing you have. And so there's a competition to have it in 4 different places. And at the moment, it's not clear which are the 4 different places. So we drew all 4. The first one, as I said, is right here, capping the convention center, right? And very close to this. The second one is at the end of the axis on the large park with actually a sloped auditorium, which we have at Seaside, and it works perfectly. You just slope it in and you face the convention center. It's very nice. It's on the center. And then I'll show you 2 more. But we are footprinting it in 4 places. I should have shown you this earlier. This is the now cleaner connection that comes in. This is the square. This is the square on which is pinned the convention center, the future, you know, et cetera, all the way down, okay? So you see where this is. Now, this is the reality of the site. This is a tremendous piece of infrastructure. It probably has, it's 6 or sometimes we believe it might even be 12 inches of pavement, 24 further inches of compressed material ready to go. And everybody thinks we should take it apart, grind it up, bring it back, forget it. So the plans we're going to see actually use the pavement different ways. Now notice one thing which is very important. Well, we have to be very disciplined here in the center. The edges don't have pavement and we're very free on both edges and on this. There's a kind of flume that comes here, which is where, you know, this is the conference center. So it's really fortunate. This is free, and this is free. So that we don't have to be rigid. We can actually be picturesque and taller because we can build a bigger. So you're going to see that these places have different character. There are 3 ways to handle this, which you're going to hear about later. Okay? You're going to hear about this later. I think it's too early. It's not too early to tell, but just a hint. The place not only has pavement, but it drains. It drains perfectly. Wow. Incredible. Okay, now, however, because it drains, it's not horizontal, right? It has a slope. So the way to build here is to pour a little, this is the pavement underneath, you pour a 6-inch slab. When you decide what your building is and the sidewalk you want to build in front of your building, and by the way, this can be pretty picturesque and irregular because we don't have a rigid road. Remember, all the pavement, as long as you leave 20 foot clear for the fire engine, you can kind of do stuff. It's really interesting. So you pour the slab on top of the already compacted fill, 6 inches up, and you build your building on it. You know, very, very inexpensively. And that's what you're seeing here. That's what would happen. Okay, and this is one of the projects here that shows, this is just a diagram for ourselves, that shows you how the built area and the green area overlaps on the project. This is something you scrutinize later. But this is the kind of discipline that we have. And we're going to do something to explain to you what we call fuselages. Okay, fuselage, you will have the existing condition here, then you'll have the condition under which it's delivered either to the builder, right, in which it says this is where the trees go, this is where the pipes go, this is where the overhead go. It's the delivered condition, and then here is what the builder gets to do. So you'll see 1, 2, 3. And this is a constant section going up. Now this is rigid because it's the base condition. That doesn't mean you can't wiggle and shake a little bit here and do picturesque, imperfect things, but there are 3 ways to study it. Now, one of them, which is the least expensive, 100% of the building and the cars, which is to say parking and roads, are on the existing asphalt. So basically we don't change any drainage pattern or anything. So 100% of the building and the cars are on the existing, except the tips. The tips are different. You know, as I said, the town centers. So that's very inexpensive. The next one actually uses the asphalt only for the cars, right? So the cars are on the existing side roads, and it takes the center for parking. And that one is a very interesting scheme because many of you have asked to make a place that's pedestrian oriented, right? We want pedestrians, we hate cars and so forth. I said, I know you hate cars, but we've got to have cars. So why don't we just put all the cars on a long string down the highway in parking lots and really liberate the roads. So you have the cars, but the cars aren't parked on the road. You never see the cars parked on the front. They're always in the back. So we have an infrastructure. The asphaltic infrastructure remains entirely to the automobile. And then you build on the green, including on the swaths that you have. It's more expensive, much higher density at that point, because you're serious about parking. That's an interesting one. There's much higher density. And then there's the last one, which is really even more interesting. Okay, here they are different kinds. I don't even, you see, this is the fuselage. This is the existing condition. This is the landing strip. You know, these are the two places, and you can see how the swales work. This is what's delivered to the developer. By the way, when I say delivered to the developer, they don't necessarily, this is really crucial. The city doesn't necessarily, or the port doesn't build it, because that would require the port to get loans and then to get the money back. So why don't you just give the drawings to the builder? The builder can do it at their rate, so long as it meets technically the low mesh. And by the way, you don't have to, I know we're stepping on toes, but if the builder does it, the bureaucracy's less, you don't have prevailing wage, all that. Okay, so one of the things we want to do is actually downstream as much as possible to the builders and keep the management. In other words, the port manages, the port doesn't build, they just manage and supervise. Much lighter hand on everything. So that's the second thing here. That's another one. And then there's the last one, which is really sort of freaky interest. Oh, by the way, so this is Ellenberg. And Ellenberg is a cool town, you know, all this stuff, great hamburgers, lots of kids. Look at this. This is amazing, okay? This is what's in the alleys, and you have all these levels. The transformers are here, the different wires are there, everything. This thing is in by the way, we're not going to do this sort of rustic version, okay? It's going to be designed, you know. But what incredible infrastructure. You can you get a new technology, sling it up. Okay, do we need to put all the transformers in? You know, maybe not. Let's just have 2 transformers per block, or 6, And then if it gets denser or this block is different, we have the infrastructure ready to go to put 12 transformers per block. You don't have to pre-design it and over-design it. The whole problem is that you always have to design for the optimal condition. That's what's expensive, because it's buried. And in this case, it's not. This is like building an airplane and actually making the infrastructure accessible. You know, the whole idea of having it, all that stuff that you have to check, you put in hatches, right? The fact that we put it underground is incredibly primitive. It's troglodytic. Why are we putting our delicate stuff underground? You know, and then we break it and we bust it and we can't retrofit it, etc. The only thing that deserves to be underground is water. And that's only because it freezes if it's not underground. All the delicate stuff that needs to be changed, switched out, should be above ground. Now this is not ugly because it's in the alley. It's in the back, no one sees it. What everybody hates about overhead wires is in the front. Terrible, messy, not designed, every cable company doing their thing at a different height, you know, not taking the old ones down, and no trees, because the trees are always chopped back. Oh, so of course you pay a fortune to bury them, but it costs a fifth as much to put it in the back. This is the kind of thing that, for a certain kind of nerdy people, puts this project on the map. You know, Engineering News Record will talk about this project, not that you care, but it's that new. It's that new. So I'm very excited. And by the way, when people tell me, go visit our local thing, don't come in with ideas from everywhere else, you know, this thing that you're from Miami, therefore you don't know anything about us. And then you take me places, what am I supposed to do but learn? That's what I learned here. I had no idea about this, but I think it's very exciting and very modern. Okay, so this is what the drawings look like before. Now, this is the radical one. This one is very interesting, because what it says, let's see if I can do it. If we use the existing swales for drainage and not as aesthetic things, but we actually put the aesthetic, in other words, this reverses it. The prior plan you saw, the swales were the fronts of the buildings, and the driving and the alleys were in the back. This one reverses it, and it actually it makes very, very thin, delicate roads, the kind you have never seen in the West. Really delicate, narrow roads, the way you see in very old cities, like the Hispanic cities like Santa Fe, or sometimes you see, well, you certainly see in the English cities in the East Coast. You know, very picturesque fronts, and very tiny. You know, the fire engine just needs 20 feet. So you can actually get very close, and instead of doing straight lines, all you have to do is make sure that the fire engine can get through, right? You know, you need to know just a line of travel. So slight S's, interesting retrogressions to plant a tree. You know, somebody has a cafe, they can pull backwards. Somebody wants a bay window, fine, just don't be hit by the fire engine. You start getting something which is amazingly, is almost medieval. Now, many of you have visited medieval cities. You're always talking about Munich. You're always talking about, you know, French cities. That's been brought up an enormous amount of time here. That's so quite surprising. The reason that those cities were so picturesque is that the infrastructure was designed the same time as the buildings, right? So the infrastructure was what was left over. That can never happen in America because the engineers come first, right? The engineers come first, and they have to do their thing, and then the buildings have to adhere to it. But if the engineering is there in the first place because the paving is all in place, there's no reason why there can't be that symbiotic relationship with the space that allows things to become really, really creative. So it's not just the buildings that have to be creative, it's actually the space you make. And that will give you that amazing experience you have in Europe of the cars slowing up so much that you actually can step off the curb without thinking. You really can, because they see you. They're going so slowly. And the dogs don't have leashes. I summer in a place called Uzès in France. There isn't a dog with a leash the whole town. Because everybody's moving, cars are everywhere, and the dogs are everywhere, and the people are everywhere, and the kids are everywhere, and nobody runs over anybody. Because everybody's moving very slowly. It's really shared space. This last one is so counterintuitive. Because, you know, why would you put the infrastructure on the open space, you know, why should the backs be the open space? But there's a lot to be said for it in terms of digging, because remember, the problem with this one, the prior ones, is that we're actually tearing up we're tearing up the asphalt to put the water in, right? We're tearing it up. This one, we break no asphalt at all. And it's the last one we have. As you can see, it's not shown. All this will be studied and shown to you, but the interesting thing is that there is real choice, real interesting choice. This is the plan. This is a plan that shows this one. Let's see what the next. Okay, this is the asphalt. Okay, here's the asphalt. The green is the open space. Here's the asphalt. The premise of this one, which is the second one, is that we take that runway, that 150-foot wide runway, and put parking lots all the way down. But we seal them from the ends with buildings, and we seal the caps with buildings. So all the parking is captured top to bottom in the back incredibly efficiently. And so people would all park here, the streets would not have cars, and people would walk from the parking lot half a block to their dwellings. And so it would be intensely pedestrian. One of the things that we discovered very late in life is that when you park in every lot, when you bring the car into every lot, the lot seems very small because the car is a monster. It doesn't, not only is it big, it's not very agile. Like it decides what it can do, right? It's just, and once you get the car, and it just hogs space. Because not only does the car have to park in the garage, when it pulls out of the garage, it has to waste 20 feet because you have to see the pedestrian on the sidewalk in case you run them over. So the car has already generated its, two cars generate their 200 square feet, and they generate another 200 square feet just to clear for the pedestrian. And then, of course, because some people aren't such good drivers, the car's only 5 feet wide, but I can't do anything unless I have a 9. I need 9 feet. And if I ever hit the garage, I'm very pissed off. Like, by the way, when you hit another car, it's kind of normal. When you hit a building, people get furious. It's extremely humiliating to hit a building. It just feels much worse. So everybody makes 9-foot and 10-foot doors. So you end up with a 50-foot lot that seems small. You take the car, put it somewhere where you pack it efficiently, seal it off. You're very close. By the way, you can choose to live on that block and have the car right behind you, or you can be half a block away for less, you pay less. And suddenly a 50 and a 40-foot lot feel like a universe. A project we did called Alice Beach, which is our most advanced project so far, if you look at the aerial photograph, you will see the parking pens, and you will see that every house has a completely private courtyard. Completely private, because there's room for it. Where'd you get that room? It's only a 40-foot lot. Well, the car is not, is not being a monster. So this one has that aspect. This is really radical. There's something very positive about this. The non-positive thing is that we're actually chewing up a lot of our nice, beautiful pavement to plant, to put the tubes in. That may not be so costly, but I wish there were one perfect scheme. Now, the other thing, we're great fans of Mormon town planning. We've worked for the Mormons in Utah. And one of the things we discovered is that what they really, really do well is urban planning. And they make a lot of wealth out of urban planning. The Mormons, Matt, 700?
738.
Okay, so when we work for the Mormons, we actually, they don't know this. They were very excited when they heard this. 765 new communities in 100 years. Okay, no one has done that. Not the British, not the Romans, no one. And this, I could give a lecture on this because it's so exciting. They wanted to build an empire that went all the way to San Diego, and apparently they even got up here. They wanted to build an empire before the United States arrived. And one of the things is they had this very, very rational, and these are about, we drew 34 or 37 of these towns, right? We do quite a few, this is Salt Lake City. We drew many of these towns, and we discovered incredible wisdom. For example, the size of the block was associated with its agricultural productive capability. Like 10 people had to live on the Mormon block, and if the land was better, the blocks could be smaller and bigger. But what people don't understand, they say, well, the Mormon block is so big, it's 660 by 660 feet. We don't like that. We like the Portland block, which is small. Well, this is the 660 feet. What is not fully understood is that they are subdividable inside. And so when you go to Salt Lake City and you go to cool places, there are all sorts of cool little, frankly, the big streets are not very good. They're all about traffic. But inside these 6 blocks, 6 New York blocks fit in a Mormon block, or probably 9 or maybe 12 Portland blocks. No, 9 Portland blocks fit. And then what happens is you can actually do different things inside the block. So one of our schemes is based on this Mormon system of actually creating large blocks and downstreaming to others what they do inside the block, right? So we maintain the outside infrastructure, we maintain, the parking and so forth, but you can do all sorts of cool stuff inside, and different cool stuff. So you move from one block to the other, and Matt is the one who did the study. Matt did a scheme like this. Okay, this is the big pavement. This is the big pavement in the center. Matt, is this correct? No, I'm sorry. This is the side pavement, this is the side pavement, but basically what Matt does is he takes the driveways, does what the others do in terms of infrastructure, basically designates a block like this, and then says it can actually be subdeveloped like this or even like this. You see, so you can go from one to another and actually arrive at whole different worlds, even more varied than Portland. This has always been a very interesting proposition to actually see, give one of these 660-foot blocks to a builder and say, what do you do inside? Could it be, do you want to do a village? Do you want to do an agricultural village? Do you want to do a bunch of lofts? What is your dream or your ideology? And so you get almost like a museum of urbanisms instead of us deciding things. And that's very compelling. So you don't only get to decide the inside of your building or the aesthetic of your building, you actually get to decide basically your neighborhood. And you have a choice. That's never been done. Except by the Mormons. Now, the other thing that we're very interested in doing is we have this scheme here. You saw this, okay? So this is what you want, all this stuff. Question is, who decides? Who decides? Does the city council decide? Does the Tri-Cities decide? Does the builder decide? Who decides? Like, is it Kennewick decides everything? So there's a system. You heard me say this earlier. Back when, forgive me, I'm so excited about this that I keep repeating it. Back in the 30s, when fascism seemed to be so efficient and communism so efficient, and they said, well, we can't compete. We can't compete with the Germans, with the Italians. They're so much more efficient. The Catholic Church came up with something called subsidiarity, which says, no, there's a form of democracy that actually is highly organized, and the idea is that the decisions are best made at the most local level that can competently make it. And I gave an example earlier about, let's say the city decides or let's say the master developer decides where the infrastructure is, but the block can decide whether that block allows chickens or not, right? And then the street front decides whether they want, the bunch of shops on that block decide whether they want parking in front or not, or they want trees, or they want a wider sidewalk for cafes. So instead of deciding all at once, within parameters, you download the decision to the level most capable of competently making it. So it doesn't all rise to the poor city council, who then has to decide, well, is the tree well 6 feet or 8 feet, or we have a signage problem, or we can't figure out the parking. The reason it's all so hard is you try to make a single decision for everybody. But actually, the more you localize it, the easier it is to make the decisions. Now, in retrospect, that's how the United States government works, right? The president gets, the federal government gets to do the military and the diplomacy, and then the states get to do other things. They have some powers. And then the counties have other powers, and the cities have other powers, and then all the departments have different powers, and it's all very organized. And one of the problems we're having in this country is that we're asking people, the reason we can't get anything done is we're asking people at the wrong level. Like, for example, if you want to put a new power line in, that is not an issue that you ask every neighbor, right? That's a regional issue, right? Because every neighbor is going to say no, because they don't give a damn. It's my backyard. The worst thing is the way we locate schools. Okay, you need a school. There's a very evident place where it needs to be. And what we do is we call in the neighbors. And we say, do you want a school? And they say, no, of course not. It's traffic. So we send all our schools to the furthest suburbs, which is exactly the wrong place. The location of a school is at the level of the city. You know, whether you have a live-work unit that serves alcohol or not is at the level of the neighborhood. You don't pass a draconian sort of, you know, this is a dry city or a dry county or a marijuana legal place. That upsets everybody. It's the wrong scale. You don't pass it at the level of the state. The marijuana laws are not at the level of the state. The marijuana laws are at the level of the cities. Because some cities, you know, don't mind it, and some cities do. And the states are diverse. So we're always in trouble because we're always taking things either too high or too low. So this is what we suggest. Kennewick is the boss. Let's face it. They run this site. But they have to consult with the Tri-Cities and with the districts. Okay? And the districts are the Port of Kennewick District, the Kennewick Irrigation District, and the Public Facilities District that actually together, you know that big Portland thing that I showed, they own almost all of that. So it isn't just about the port. There's a lot of land immediately adjacent that these districts do. Now, right now they fight each other, but if they were on the same committee, it might work better. Okay, you get the Art Center, you get something else. So, okay, so Kennewick organizes these two, and then the district organizes the developers, the people who build this stuff, and then the developers have to consult with the households and the businesses, which they always do where the stuff doesn't sell. You always have to consult, like, do you want to actually buy this stuff? You know, you want to lease it? But up here, the blocks, what happens inside the block, chickens or no chickens, or farm or no farm, you know, cow or no cow, parking or no parking, is done by the households, and then the businesses are really desperate about the streets. The blocks is what happens in the back, what you do in the back, you know, the noise and the stink, or the grandmother flat, the granny flats, etc. But the businesses don't care about the back; they care about the front. You know, are you forcing me to have the wrong kind of tree? Or, you know, birds are shitting on parked cars. You know, all this problem. It shouldn't go to city council. It just destroys your mind. That's a local issue. So here we get this full hierarchy of people who make decisions, and then there's a series of decisions that have to be made, which we will enrich. Infrastructure decisions, finance decisions, building decisions, civic building decisions. Civic buildings are the art centers, the convention centers. And then there is the management. Who's going to manage what? You know, is City Hall going to manage everything, or is City Hall going to manage certain things? Who manages the park? Who manages the squares? Who manages the playground? That's nothing but trouble if it's done at a different level, right? And they say, well, we don't want playgrounds anymore. It's too hard to manage. Well, I'm sorry, it's too hard to manage at the level of the city, but maybe the block can take care of it. And so the public spaces and the maintenance. And so here you see, for example, take any one of these things. The civic buildings should be decided by Kennewick and the districts and possibly actually the Tri-Cities, like that. The public spaces, districts, the developers, and the households. You know, maintenance. Well, maybe Kennewick doesn't want to maintain all the public stuff. Maybe it's the households, the blocks, the businesses, and the streets. That's just very quickly done. But for this to work smoothly, it's very complex. You know, you need to help me say who makes decisions. By the way, you could take it further down, and you could take it further up. You can take it to the state, and you can take it to the nation. Like if you're going to take state money, then you have to take it to the state. Okay, if you're going to really care about green climate change, well, why don't you consult with the United Nations, because they're actually in charge. You know, so you take it up. But I didn't want to do that. That would have been very elegant. But this is really to get things done and get things done quickly. We want to do this. We're going to make, so one of the things we're going to develop over this week is not just the hardware, it's the software. The hardware you will see, there are going to be beautiful drawings and, you know, and lots of renderings and you're going to fall in love with it, then we're gone, and then somebody sobers up and says, well, what do we do next? Okay, and one of the things that I'd like to get to as quickly as possible is that there be no hiccup. So this whole idea that we start, and we start cheap, and we start smart, and we start cool is very important. Now, it has a lot to do with design. These are some architects that are very famous. They're up in Seattle, and they do things like this. Now, what are we looking at here? Look at that pole. What is that pole? Okay, that pole is a piece of aluminum. What is this? That's lumber, hardly cut. But it's very cool. And look at this. Okay, that's a very, very expensive house. This is the kind of place that all the Microsoft people live in. Okay, guess what this is here? You see that thing? Look at this. What's here? It's the same thing. It's a piece of black steel. Okay? Now, so when you get this asset, which is here, and we have 3 bays here, and we have another 3 bays, and another 3 bays, and we know we can raise it, and we know we can angle it, and we know we can take down the plywood, but why can't this be an extremely cool art center to incubate the audience that will then make it evident that a bond issue would work? Because right now, no one is going to vote for the bond issue because it loses money, because there isn't enough audience, but there isn't enough audience because there isn't a cool place to meet. So it's this chicken egg. And everything about this place, I would say, in theory, that when we leave, because the infrastructure's in place, because there's no nature left, there are no endangered species, it's all ready to go, that you actually use the velocity and just start. Just start. And if it doesn't work, you adjust. Because what happens is you're going to discuss it for years, and you still won't know. You only know when you start. That's the best test. But we established a situation where you say, okay, we tried that, and it turned out that whatever, that it didn't sell, or it was more expensive than we thought, or it was too disorganized, and then you have feedback loops. Because this is all too, and if you don't do that, you're going to default the old expensive way of doing it, just a very expensive way. Boom. And that will be, and then it'll take forever, and then actually, more or less, it won't work. Because you don't have real expensive real estate here. You know, houses are selling for $150,000, $170,000, you know, on big lots, new. And so it's very, very important that you be extremely agile in this place. And agility has to do with lowering drastically the level of red tape, which is why we call this a pink zone. You know, pink zone is where the red tape has been lowered so that lots of people can operate. Smaller people, immigrants, you know, not just big developers with big lawyers. It's just ready to go. And the spirit of it could actually become influential, not only retrofitting your other downtowns. You know, wow, so that's how you do it. That's what a real awning looks like. That's cool. You know, and the other downtowns become healthier, but also you put this place on the map. Here's an anecdote which is incredibly important. Detroit is full of young people doing incredibly cool things. Now, if you get somebody my age and you say, give me a tour, they'll give you what's called the ruin porn tour. You know, the thrill you get when civilization collapses, the abandoned railway station. You know, people your age and my age have told me, this used to be my house, and it's an empty lot. This used to be my high school, an empty lot. This is my mother's house, an empty lot. You know, and just you say, oh my God, this is amazing. Or you can take a young person, and within this ocean of disaster, there's an archipelago of fantastic restaurants, fantastic artists, people renovating houses, all this stuff happening. Exiles from Brooklyn are going to Detroit because they can get things done. Because one of the things people haven't noticed is that Detroit can't afford cops, but they also can't afford bureaucrats. And the kids have figured this out. They're actually doing it all themselves very responsibly. They're not poisoning people with their restaurants. You know, they're not falling downstairs or hurting themselves because they're smart, you know, 25-year-olds, the kind that we used to give P-51 Mustangs to land, you know, with 4 machine guns, you know, and we trusted them. You can actually trust young people to do things. The average age of the soldier in World War II was 22 years old. And they had a lot of heavy and dangerous equipment. Why can't they build a house? A house doesn't have a gas tank, it doesn't have a machine gun, you know, it doesn't even move. Why can't we let them You know, we gave them an airplane 50 years ago, and now we can't even give them a hammer without a permit, or to cook a cookie without selling it. And one of the things about this pink zone is not only to get the building going, but to get the businesses going. You know, the kind of thing that very often happens illegally, because they just can't deal with the bureaucracy. So there's a lot of software here. My hope is that this actually goes all out at every level. Management, you know, incubating businesses, just a model of bureaucracy, you know, very light, you know, a lot of that kind of way that was used to build the West in the first place. You know, where people built Portland without any money, just smarts. And if you do that, it will be really, really radical. And by the way, radical in a way that could actually get both the right and the left together, right? Because the left wants to do things for young people, and the right wants bureaucracy off their backs. I mean, you could really come together on an experiment like this. And so your famous split, you may have to present with different leading headlines, depending on who you're talking to, but this could really work out. Could really work out, and that's one of the reasons we're all so excited about this. Okay, no questions today, but just let that seep, okay? And then we have many more days in which we get feedback. Among other things, we really need to eat, because I'm on East Coast time. So the deal is, these night meetings we talk, the day meetings you talk, okay? So good night. Yeah, do come back.